remember the day it came out and landed in my mailbox and thinking like, I have made it. And like the sad thing is like, you have not made it.
Hey, it's your CNF and buddy Brendan O'Mara. Hey, and this is CNF, the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. My guest today is AC Shilton, freelancer, farmer, lover of chickens. Let's do an ad read. Creative Nonfiction Podcast, greatest podcast in the world. Discover your story, man, with Bay Path University's fully online MFA in Creative Nonfiction Writing. Recent graduate Christine Brooks recalls her experience with Bay Path's MFA faculty as being, quote, filled with positive reinforcement and a commitment. They have true passion and love for their work. It shines through with every comment, every edit, and every reading assignment. The instructors are available to answer questions, big and small, and it is obvious that their years of experience as writers and teachers have made a faculty that I doubt can be beat anywhere, end quote. Don't just take her word for it, man. Apply now at baypath.edu/MFA. Classes begin January 21st, first. Also want to give it a shout out to Riverteeth for the promotional support. They are a journal of nonfiction narrative. Go check them out, riverteethjournal.com, for submission guidelines and maybe even subscribe. Why not? Go ahead, do it. Okay, that's it. So here we are. I can only keep it in the cage for so long. It's rattling the cage, man. Briff. So maybe you're a legacy CNFer, hey. Maybe you're here for the first time. This is what we do. I talk to badass writers, filmmakers, and audio producers about the art and craft of telling true stories. I chart their journey and try and tease out what inspires them and how they go about the work in the face of existential dread. Maybe that's just me, and let me tell you, ain't a whole lot of work getting done around these parts. Did you check out the CNF snack episode? The 3-minute job? Get used to it, man. Another one coming Monday. Sometimes you need a little something that's not an hour of your time, am I right? Something you can listen to while you're brushing your teeth or putting on your deodorant. I don't know why I'm using bathroom activities, but 3 minutes, you should be brushing your teeth, but you should be taking about 2 to 3 minutes. I'm not here to tell you how to brush your teeth. Just a suggestion. Keep the conversation going on Twitter at CNFPod. Instagram's at CNFPod, Facebook at CNF Podcast, and head over to BrendanO'Mara.com, for show notes and to sign up for the monthly newsletter where I give out reading recommendations and what you might have missed from the world of the podcast. Once a month, no spam. Far as I can tell, you can't beat it. Like I said, AC Shilton is here. Work's been in New York Times, Outside Magazine, Outside Online. She is why I stay on Twitter. Actually, she's one of those people because I likely would never have found her if not for Twitter. People I follow her, and she's always posting pictures of her chickens and linking up to great stuff, and she engages on the platform, and I was like, I dig you, I dig your work. Here's an axe. Let's thrash. So here we are. Thrash metal. Oh. How does a journalist come to own a farm?
Right. So I thought about what can I do that is even less lucrative and more work than freelance journalism. And I decided owning a farm was the next best thing. Yeah, it's funny. My husband works for the National Park Service, so we've kind of bounced around the country going from park to park. And we ended up here in rural Tennessee. He's at Big South Fork National River and Recreation Area. And we ended up here, and I really just loved it from the the moment we kind of pulled into our like temporary housing when we first got, moved here, I kind of felt like, oh, this is the right spot for me. And so, I grew up in Washington, D.C., so, I'm kind of a city kid through and through, but growing up, I always wanted to have a farm. And it's funny, I tell this story about like, helping my dad with, very basic lawn work, as a kid. And I would always turn it into an imaginary game that I was playing farm. And I was feeding animals and things like that. And so we started kind of looking around, and the great thing about rural Tennessee, I mean, there's a lot of struggles here too, of course, but one of the great things is land is very affordable. And so we started kind of looking around, and we had originally wanted to just have enough room I love to garden. So, have enough room to garden, and I have a couple horses. So just, we were looking for, maybe 5 to 10 acres in a house. And well, we spent a couple years looking for that, and that never ended up, the right spot never ended up, presenting itself. And so this place came online, and, it's 45 acres. So it was not at all what we were shopping for. It has been run as a traditional cattle farm for several generations, meaning that they would start their cattle here and then finish them in feedlots, not here. And so it was set up already for that. But, it needed a lot of work. The houses were there. There's multiple houses on it, the whole thing. I mean, it was like way more than we were like ready to bite off and chew. But because I'm a spoiled brat who like throws a tantrum when she wants something that she can't have, we ended up buying it. It's just like, it's the most beautiful place. And it's, got these rolling green hills full of, mature pasture and some woods and an old barn on a hillside that's kind of falling down, but it looks like, shabby chic rustic. And it's great. So we put an offer on it and, ended up, purchasing it obviously. And then, since that day, we have been completely overwhelmed with what it actually takes to farm. So yeah, here we are, and we still have so much work to do to get it up and running. But every few months we add something new, and hopefully soon we'll be adding some sort of grass-fed beef or possibly meat goats. I'm kind of going between the two, trying to figure out exactly what I want to do from a sustainability perspective. So yeah, that's where we're at. I love it. It's a ton of work. I can't remember the last time I slept in past 5:30, even on a weekend. But I don't know. It's funny, I've noticed I don't want to travel anymore. I turn down pretty much any sort of story which requires travel because I don't want to leave my farm. I love it. But when I do end up traveling for something, I can't wait to get home. I just, I love being here. So
that's amazing. So how do you start to balance the freelance journalism aspect that you've built your young professional career towards with essentially what is a full-time job of raising your animals and tending to your land?
Yeah. So, well, the thing is that I am hardly alone on this. So there's this interesting statistic. I wish I had it in front of me to get the exact numbers, but basically the USDA keeps track of, how farmers are doing, and young farmers across the board are having to work multiple jobs to keep their farms afloat, because to get the land, to get the equipment is so cost intensive. Farming is just not lucrative, especially on a small scale. And so, the farming that, I'm doing, or, people like me are doing, it's a money loser. And so all of us have full-time jobs. So I'm really not alone in this, but yeah, it's, we both have our 2 full-time jobs, plus we have the farm work that we do. And it just means being incredibly efficient about time management. And it means that I've had to let some things go, both from a, personal standpoint, right? So at some point I realized, I couldn't, I used to race triathlons, and I can't do that at a competitive level, and still manage my farm. So, now I take advantage of, an extra 40 minutes and go for a run, but that's that. And that, I'm not able to, maintain that level of fitness that I used to be able to maintain, and that's fine. So it's just kind of a matter of managing your priorities and figuring out, okay, this is where we are right now. The next 5 years are going to be really, really hard while we set this thing up. At some point, hopefully it will start to run itself a little bit, although it'll always take a lot of care and feeding. So, I'm also a little bit more cautious about the assignments I take, making sure that, I've really cut back. I used to do a lot of, $300 to $400, web assignments, which is how which is a good way to make money for sure, but you have to churn and burn, you got to keep kind of moving. And I've been able to kind of say, I want to spend my time more wisely attacking, those bigger projects. And it's scary. I will be so upfront with that, saying it's really scary to turn down the little assignments that keep your groceries, coming and, keep your bank account full. But I, have been trying to avoid the content mill, because I just don't have time.
Mm. And so you grew up in D.C. and as a self-admitted kind of a weird kid who loved farming and weeding and dreaming of having a farm. So at what point do you start to kind of get that bug to be a writer and to be a journalist? When does that get into your blood?
So I have a kind of a strange path into journalism, which is that I originally, so my degree is in sociology and I thought I was going to go get a PhD. And looking back on it, this all makes a lot of sense, because, I'm fascinated by how interactions work and how people, and power work. And that's really important to journalism, right? But I didn't think about that as a career opportunity at that time. My school didn't have a journalism program. So, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go get a PhD. That's going to be that. I'll do research, which is, what a PhD, entails. And then at the time I was racing bikes. I was on our, collegiate cycling team and I, was really into that. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take a few years off between going back to graduate school and I'm going to work in the bicycle industry. So I got a job at a bicycling manufacturer. It was a marketing job, and then I kind of got a series of marketing jobs, one of which happened to be at a newspaper. And so I worked in the marketing department of a newspaper. And I realized pretty quickly in that job that I was in the wrong part of the newspaper. And that, I didn't have any sort of interest at all in, something newspaper subscriptions or advertisements. I wanted to be sitting up in the newsroom. And so, we, like any newspaper, there were a lot of layoffs. It was 2008, 2009. So, newspapers were starting to really shed jobs. And so I was able to kind of start picking up a little bit of work here and there. If they needed somebody to, write, blogs are really big. So I started writing a blog, and, so I was able to kind of pick up work that way. And then from there, when the newspaper closed, I was able to get a very, very entry-level editing position at a local magazine. So it's kind of a roundabout way to get into journalism. But looking back on it, it makes a lot of sense because, I liked research, I liked writing, I liked thinking about people and structure and power. And so I feel really glad that I found my way here because it's what I love.
What were the kind of stories that really started to stick in your craw as you cut your teeth in journalism?
What do you mean by stick in my craw? That just kind of bothered me that I felt like were not be. What do you mean by that? I just want to make sure I understand it.
Oh yeah, so just the stories that maybe you couldn't escape, that you had to tell in that sense, that appealed to your taste. Right.
So, gosh, I've kind of written about everything over the years. As a freelancer, you're kind of just, it's useful to be able to be a generalist. But the stories that have always interested me or brought me back or made me feel like, okay, maybe I'm making $200 for the assignment for a little local newspaper, which is what happened when I was just starting out. The story, but I'll, kind of keep plugging away on it no matter what, even though I'm not making any money, is, stories where people are being taken advantage of or, getting the runaround. That always will get me. If you call me and say hey, I've tried everything, you're my last resort. I'm being, bullied or whatever. I'm always going to sit and listen to you. Even if there's not a story that I end up pursuing, that just always captivates me, right? That's the best way to get my attention. Those stories. And then, stories that have broader implications for why we behave the way we do. Those always are just really interesting to me. So there's a story I wrote years ago for Outside Online that went super viral, about the end of PBR beer. And basically it was so big with hipsters and then kind of sales started falling off. And it ended up being like such an interesting story because I, interviewed a bunch of researchers about like what makes things cool, which is like such a nebulous topic, right? But like, it's like one of those things that just is so interesting to me because I just want to know why people feel the way they do or like why people are attracted to this thing, and then they're suddenly not. So those are these stories that I'm always really interested in is, anybody who is struggling against the system or, kind of an explainer on, why we feel the way we feel about, these things in society.
So what does make things cool?
It's a great question. No one knows. Yeah. I mean, that's like what's so like, it's like this thing that, people are always trying to put their pulse on, and it's really hard to figure out what makes things cool because the second like something is cool, and so this is what happened with PBR was like it was cool because it wasn't cool, but then it hit this tipping point where it became cool, and then it was no longer cool, right? And so, it's this, I don't know. I don't really know what's cool. And people always ask me, what makes a story go viral, and to tell you the truth, I have no clue. And nobody does, right? Like it's really interesting that like nobody has any clue what makes something go viral and something very similar not. And we've tried to replicate that success, I think, of that story or other stories like it. And I can never tell you what's gonna like really just shatter the internet and what's not.
As you started to gain a little bit of traction with journalism, what was maybe some early validation that you might have felt from someone who might have took you under their wing or mentored you a little bit and said that you were you were on the right path? Be like, keep doing this. This is something you're really good at.
Really early on, I had an editor at the Naples Daily News. And this is a funny story. Okay. So I moved, I was working at the Honolulu Advertiser. And then I worked at a Honolulu magazine. And then my husband's job moved and we moved to Florida, and I had all this experience that I gathered in Honolulu, and I'd been an editor, so on and so forth. So we moved to Florida and we moved to Naples, which has a small paper. And I thought, it will be no trouble for me to get a job at this local paper. I've now worked in a newspaper and a magazine. And they had lots of jobs available. I ran into this stumbling block, which is that the Naples Daily News at that time, I don't know if this is the case now, but only would hire journalists with journalism degrees. I spent the next 3 years getting passed over for jobs, even though I was writing freelance for them and winning a lot of their Florida Press Club awards. So every year they'd they'd submit some of my stories to the Florida Press Club, and every year I'd win something. And I still couldn't get a job there. So it was really frustrating. And I had these 3 years of feeling like, wow, like maybe I'm not qualified to do this, and second guessing myself. The good news was that I had an editor there, Jay Schlichter, who runs their little community papers that they're like the subset of the Naples Daily News. There's like this, community paper called the Collier Citizen that goes to like one section of its readership in this one particular area. And so he oversaw that paper, and it's not prestigious work at all. The circulation is tiny. I think it's maybe even free. It's community news at its like very most, community news level. I once wrote a story about an installation of a flagpole at a community center. I mean, not glamorous, but he was so encouraging, and he, would always, if my stories needed more work, he would never hesitate to push back and say, I think we need another interview or another voice, or, did you think about this? So he was a talented and helpful editor, but he was also incredibly encouraging. And if something was good, would always take the time to tell me it was good. And so, despite the fact that, his corporate overlords were saying, you can't hire this woman. And it's funny because several editors personally asked for me to be hired, and I still couldn't be hired. So despite the fact that I was getting that like really, really negative feedback that like I was not qualified, I did not deserve to be in this field, having a couple of editors who kept, me going and kept saying, yes, you do, we're sorry we can't hire you, but, we'll give you as much work as we can. That was a huge confidence booster, and I think kept me in the field.
So from that point on, how do you start to level up and to start crafting pitches that are going to start landing you at more prominent, more visible outlets?
Yeah. So I talk to, when I talk to young journalists about this, I always kind of suggest starting at your local paper. And it is not glamorous. You will write about a flagpole, but every one of those assignments paid me. I never worked for free. I always had, some sort of income coming in. And then that gave me, a little bit of leeway, I was working my ass off on $200, stories. So I had to write, 6 or 7 a week, to stay afloat. But, it meant that I could, have a little bit of time on the side to write things just for me, that I, and level up and work on that. And so Runner's World was the first magazine I wanted to target because I've been a runner forever and ever. I think I pitched them 6 or 7 times before I finally made it in. And so that's like the other piece of advice, to young journalists is keep trying. You're not going to make it in your first pitch, or maybe you will, if you're more talented than me. But it took 6 or 7 tries. And I think what eventually happened was I kind of kept pitching the same editor. She edited this one section of the magazine that I had read in Media Bistro was relatively easy to break into, right? So I kind of followed all the rules. I read about how to pitch it. I picked that editor, and I specifically went out and looked for stories for her that would fit that mold. And eventually cracked it, but it did take a while. And it was a 200-word story. And I think this next piece is okay, so I wrote this 200-word story for this national magazine. I remember the day it came out and landed in my mailbox and thinking I have made it. And the sad thing is you have not made it. One story, one small story in a national print magazine does not actually elevate your profile. And this is why I really suggest not writing for free. Because if Runner's World had asked me to write that for free, I think I would have been so tickled that I finally landed this national assignment that I would have done it. But it literally meant nothing, and so they paid me, as they should have. But I think, at the end of the day, you need to get paid for your work because it is work, and one assignment, is not going to change your resume. So from there, I just kind of kept pitching that editor. I kept asking, what they needed. And then I just kind of, to be perfectly honest, I got very lucky. So I, got a line on a pitch for, Outside Magazine that was just I knew the second I kind of got the the buzz that it was going to be just a perfect story for them. It was this, so I used to work at a bicycle manufacturer, and they did this funny thing where they had a wind tunnel for aerodynamics testing, and they did a test to see if shaved legs versus non-shaved legs were faster. And it was just one of those things where I happened to know, from having worked there, I had some old colleagues who were there, so I was one of the first people to kind of see that they were doing this, and I was able to take it immediately to Outside and say, I know the players, I can get you this story. And it was such a slam dunk. I just got really, really lucky there. I think a lot of people do pitch, over and over and have never get that foot in. So to some degree it was luck. I've been, very lucky to be able to kind of one at a time break into that next thing and that next thing and that next thing. But it does take usually, Runner's World took me, a long time to break into, and other places as well. There are still magazines I have not broken into, despite the fact that I've tried and tried and tried. So, I don't want other runners to feel like I hit every one on the first try like I did Outside. That is not the case.
Yeah. How did you have the endurance and the courage to keep pitching, even keep pitching the same person who might have been turning you down every time, and not feel like you were sort of annoying them? You had enough wherewithal to be I think this is a good idea. I'm going to keep sending it to them despite the rejection. How did you break through there and just had the wherewithal to keep on going?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that really helped me was that, I got to work as an editor fairly early in my career, and I was a really low-level associate editor. But, we would get pitches and send them around the office. And I think when you sit in that office and you very clearly, it very quickly becomes clear that, it's not actually, the pitch was bad. It's that we had something similar, or the issue theme wasn't quite right, or it's very rare that a pitch is truly bad. And most of the time, editors are excited to get pitches because they need ideas, right? And so having sat on the other side of the desk first, I think took away some of that, like, like that needling of rejection and feeling like it's you, because it's really not you. It's really that it's, what's going into the book that month or what just went into the book. And, magazines work 6 months in advance. So like you might not realize it, but there is between now and when this story is going to publish, there are 2 other things that are similar already, So, I think that really helps me with that confidence. And to be clear, I still, struggle with feeling like, oh, all my ideas are stupid, or like, or am I annoying editors or whatever. Yesterday I had to like, gird myself to send that follow-up email, where I know that it's, probably a no, but I got to follow up just in case. It still sucks. But I really quickly, I want to give a caveat about that, because yesterday, I guess it was Monday, I was debating whether or not to send a follow-up email, because sometimes it's just so shitty. You're like, if they haven't responded by now, they don't want my story, like they would have responded if they wanted it. I sent a follow-up email, on Monday just to be like, I'm just going to dot my I's and cross my T's. And, an editor at a very prestigious publication ended up coming back to me and saying, actually, yes, we do want this. And I'm so glad I did that, because I almost took it to like my next, outlet that was going to be, much lower paying.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a casual reminder to everybody to definitely follow up, because sometimes your editors do want it and they've just forgotten. And the worst that happens is they don't respond, right?
I'm the same way too in terms of follow-ups with big posts. Sometimes I get like the nibble, and then a couple weeks will go by, and then I'm like, you know what? I've gotten into that where I just don't follow up, and then of course it dies on the vine. So it's really good advice that you're saying. Like, even if you don't feel like it, even if you feel like it's already been rejected, like you really do the editor's inboxes just get hammered with stuff. So you really do just have to kind of get your thing to the top of it at a good time in the work week and the work day. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's right. I've been meaning to reach out to AC, but I've got all this immediate stuff. I want to tell her to go do this piece. So yeah, like following up, it's really wise counsel.
It is hard because I feel like, once always afraid I'll follow up and annoy them. Right.
Right.
Because I get so many PR follow-ups and I'm like, stop following up, so I'm like worried that I'll annoy them, but B, it's like that thing, like you're saying there's still a chance, it's like, it's like once you get that rejection, there is no more chance, and you're closing that door, by asking for that rejection. But yeah, this was a case where I'm so glad I did it instead of just moving on, because I would have started working on it for this, much less lower paying pub. And then maybe they would have gotten back to me and been like, hey, we want it. And I would have been like, well, shit,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely a lesson learned. It is always worth following up.
And I love digging into the way a freelancer goes about crafting pitches and the process by which you log them and submit them and everything. So when you were kind of backing up to when you were sending some out to Runner's World and getting 6, 7, 8 rejections, how have your pitches sort of evolved and maybe gotten to a point where you've got a pretty good formula about if it's going to get accepted, this is how it typically looks like?
Yeah, that has been such an evolving process for me because I'm not, I didn't go to J school, although I've heard that they don't teach us at J school, so I guess it doesn't matter, but,
no, they don't at all. I mean, I blitzed my journalism program at UMass Amherst. I was a double major. I added journalism late, and even in the MFA program I went to in creative nonfiction, it's like they don't teach that as a skill, but ultimately that's the skill you need. It really is.
It's crucial. Okay, so I would say, what I have changed, and so two things. I actually don't pitch that much, and that although this year I have been pitching more because I have really wanted to transition to the projects I want to do. But my advice for young starting out journalists is to avoid pitching in that you want to get repeat work from clients because that's the easiest way to make a living, right? So if you're having to make your work by pitching constantly, or if you're pitching 50 or 60 stories a year or whatever, I think you would be better served to pitch less and spend more time on the work you are assigned to get repeat assignments. I don't know. Maybe that's not popular advice, but I think that pitching is useful, and especially when you want to level up, right? Or if you want to change your beat, then you do need to be able to pitch. And so I'll get to that piece of it in a second, but I always try and stress to journalists, young freelancers, that the best, most lucrative way to make money is to have repeat clients and editors coming back to you and saying, can you do this other thing? Okay, so that piece of advice aside, right, when you want to level up or get a new client or change your beat, the thing I have learned the most this last year of really now I'm only pitching long form features. That's what I want to be doing. And I had this moment where I was like, you know what, why am I pitching, $200 service journalism? I mean, I love service journalism, and if people assign it to me, I'll happily do it. But what I really want to be doing is features, so I should be pitching features, right? So, the thing I have learned is that you almost have to report the whole story, which is it's hard to justify at first. But then you start actually selling stuff and realizing that oh, wait a second, this does work. The thing that has changed probably the most about my pitching is that, for example, this pitch I sold yesterday, I've actually been reporting this story for 3 to 4 months while I've been trying to figure out, the right spot for it. So, the pitch started out with an anecdote. That, was, a scene. And then from the scene, I've got, then we move on to kind of the nugget of the problem that I want to investigate. Other thing that I've really struggled with is narrowing down what is this story about? Because I tend to be oh, and there's this cool thing. Oh, and this other cool thing. And oh my gosh, this cool thing, right? So I tend to want to stick it all in there because I find the whole world to be fascinating all of the time. But it's so much better if you can say this is what the story is about. And even though I had thought I had done that for this particular pitch that got about yesterday, the editor and I had to hop on the phone, and he still kind of wanted some clarification about what is that struggle that's happening here that's going to what is the story still really, really about? Is that nugget is really important. And then, showing that you have done at least enough research that the story is going to be more or less there. And still sometimes things fall apart, right? And I think editors do understand that. But for this story in particular, I had several of my characters picked out. And I had quotes from them so that they knew that these people are willing to more or less work with me. And I'm not just saying these are the people I'm going to interview, or they may or may not be up for it, right? I know these people are already gonna sit down with me. So those are kind of the basics, is making sure you've got kind of a scene so people can understand, what this, what's going to happen. Making sure you've got the nugget of the problem, and then introducing a couple of the characters. So that's kind of worked for me. My pitches are quite long at this point, and I know some editors don't like that, but I figure they can stop reading. But I just found that when I was sending short pitches, I was finding that, editors kind of wrote back and were need more info, and so I was well, might as well just stick all this in. I don't know, maybe that's bad advice, but it's worked for me. Does that help?
It does help. And I wonder too so if you're reporting, doing a lot of a lot of pre-reporting and sometimes several months worth, what are the conversations that you're having with your sources when you don't have a publication lined up yet? You just kind of have your dream of where all right, I want this to land here. But I'm still going to talk to you and ask you questions as if this thing is actually happening. So what are those conversations like when you're kind of lobbying your sources for a story that doesn't quite yet have a home yet?
There are two things I try to do. I try to be very clear about that and be I'm a freelancer, and so I have to sell this story, and it may take me months to sell this story. And I also I tell people I work extraordinarily slowly. People I think are always really shocked at the slow pace of my work. And it's not that I'm bad at my job. I mean, maybe I am, but it's just that the publishing is extraordinarily slow, especially in magazines, right? Newspapers newspapers are fast, but yeah, magazines are slow. And then, I just I have to have all of my ducks in a row, right? Like I want to have every piece of paperwork. And if I have to go through the FOIA process to get it, I will get it, so I'm very clear about I'm independent. I don't have a magazine backing me at this moment, but here's who I am. Here's some of the other work that I have done here, and I would usually send people to my website or whatever to see that I am legitimately a journalist, and not just taking their time. And then just, being really upfront about you're not going to hear from me for 3 or 4 months, likely. And then I'm going to come back in your inbox and I'm going to be like, guess what? I saw the story. Let's do an interview tomorrow. That's just kind of how it works. And for the most part, if people are interested in telling their stories, I find that they are willing to work with me under those parameters, but I just try to just lay those out front so everybody knows kind of, I may never sell this story, but I'm interested in it. I think your story is important and I'm going to try.
And I think a lot of freelancers they're always interested in how everyone generates their ideas, where their ideas come from. So where do yours come from, and how do you refill the well so you can when you feel like pitching, you feel like you've got a stable of ideas?
Good question. I wish I had a really clear answer on that because they kind of come from everywhere. I just feel like it just comes from being a really just curious person, and feeling like the whole world is full of curious things. So often I'll read a book, and I will underline the pieces of the book that I feel deserved more attention, and I want to look into those. So for example, I recently read Michael Pollan's new book on psychedelics, which is great, by the way. But he talks a little bit about the Johnny Appleseed of psychedelic mushrooms, who happens to have resided in Kentucky, and there's 2 sentences on him, and so I underlined it, and I was like, wait, that would be such a good feature. I want to know about that guy, So I haven't actually pitched that one. Please don't steal my idea. But actually, you can't. I'm really busy. Somebody else can take that. It's fine. So I don't know. I just think things like that. I do get some people coming to me, which is great. Keeping good networks of sources, and just making sure that you are, courteous and you help and, polite to sources so that when they have something, they think, oh, I know a journalist. I get a lot of, stories that way. So yeah. And honestly, the world is just so full of interesting things that I don't understand that I'm constantly looking up, and thinking, could this be a story?
So how did you land with Netflix for the Innocent Man project?
Right. So I was digging into the Denise Haraway case and got partnered up with this documentary that was working on doing a documentary about John Grisham's book, The Innocent Man, which focuses on Ronald Williamson's case, the Deborah Sue Carter murder. But the Deborah Sue Carter murder and the Denise Haraway case are kind of inextricably they are both totally intertwined. You kind of can't cover one without covering the other. And so I had been looking into the Denise Haraway case and really knew a lot about it. And so kind of got into it that way. And it was such a fun way to approach a story, because I think about my stories in, kind of a 2-dimensional sense, living on a printed page. And it was so cool to have the opportunity to understand how sound and music and, visuals can really, enhance your storytelling. And it's funny, it's been actually a little bit hard to transition back to print because it's so rich to work in documentary and feel oh, what we could do is we can shoot this and we can shoot it like this, and then to have to kind of come back to print and be well, I guess I'm back to writing sentences. Not that I don't love print, but I feel I lost some of my storytelling tools, but but it also is forcing me to work harder to feel I can tell a story just as well in print. So yeah.
Yeah. And what's kind of cool is that, you do this Netflix thing, and then you're able to parlay the arrival fallacy of it into this piece that you wrote for the New York Times. And I love this notion that you tackle in this piece, and it goes to a two-part thing I want to ask you, like how sort of just generating work generates work, so to speak. Like, you wouldn't have this arrival fallacy thing had you not done the Netflix thing, which parlayed into this column. And this little feature. So maybe you could speak to what arrival fallacy is, and we'll kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So arrival fallacy is this idea that you are going to be happy once you achieve X, right? So I will be happy once my documentary is up on Netflix, right? And I think I really believed that to be true, right? Like, I thought that, like, I worked really hard for, a year and a half on this thing, and I felt like, we're going to get these innocent men out of prison. Like, that's going to happen. I'm going to feel like my work is meaningful. And a thing that, like, people don't talk about that much, like, I don't know, like, my work up until Innocent Man, some of it was very meaningful. And, there was the, like, occasional feature that I sold that I felt like, yes, like I am doing good work. But then, like, a lot of it, and I think this is true for a lot of freelancers, but a lot of it then was like, I don't know, 10 ways to get great abs for summer, because that's what pays your bills, and so, like, you have, well, at least I have to do some of that work, to make my, my bills and my mortgage and all of that. So, I really always struggled with, like, am I doing good enough work that actually makes a difference? Because, like, that's what matters to me. Like, I don't care at all about being known or famous or winning prizes. Really, what I want to do is I want to do work that, like, matters beyond myself. And so Innocent Man gave me that opportunity to really feel like, look, we are, like, casting a big, big lens on, the justice system and how fallible it is. And coerced confessions, which maybe a lot of people have never thought about. And so I felt like this was going to be it. And then, it goes up online, and, like, your life really just goes on, to be totally honest. And it's funny, I'm working on another little small documentary with somebody, and the subject of that documentary, like, has it very much in his mind that he is going to be famous. Like, this is it. I kind of want to sit down with him and be like, your life just kind of just goes on. That's fine. Like, that's actually great. Like, I like my life, like, I'm pretty happy with my life, but it feels surprisingly different than what you anticipated, and that's arrival fallacy. So you get there and you're happy for a second when you see your work that you have worked so hard on, like, getting this moment of attention. And then, like, humans have kind of a set point of happiness that we tend to return to. And they've documented this with, lottery winners. They've documented this with, the example I use in that New York Times piece is professors who got tenure, right? They got tenure. They're no happier or, like, less happy than those who didn't get tenure a couple of years later. This very much happened to me, and I had kind of a really shit summer where I just felt like, wow, I've done the best thing I'm ever going to do in my career, and that's that. And now I feel pretty depressed. And so, I started thinking about what might be happening to me, and I think around the same time Anthony Bourdain killed himself, or died by suicide. And I don't know, I'm not a celebrity person. I'm not that interested in celebrities, but I did like Anthony Bourdain. And I kind of felt like, why do so many high achievers seem to struggle with things like this? And started doing some creative Googling, which is how I came to, like, oh, there's this thing I've never heard of. And then pitched it to the New York Times. So, I think it kind of comes back to, just, feeling like, wait, what's actually going on here? What does this say about society? And my training as a sociologist and a social scientist to think about, like, well, let's think critically about what could possibly be happening here, and then turning that into a story. And I think that's kind of like what I've kind of done for a lot of my career is like, wait, what's happening here? Why don't I understand this? Let's see if I can turn it into a story. And it worked out very nicely in that instance.
Yeah, and the whole idea of this ties into the hedonic treadmill.
Yes.
To right. It just kind of you reach a certain level, but then that becomes kind of the new normal, and then it just feels normal, and then you need another high, so to speak.
Yes. Exactly. So, right. I got this, like, amazing assignment yesterday that I'm so excited about. Right. And then, like, I had to remind myself that, like, I'm going to feel super awesome for the next 6 weeks as I dig into this. And, like, I love doing the work. Like, that's my favorite thing in the world. And then it's like, there's going to be a letdown, like, it's going to come out. And then, like, I'm going to be like, oh God, now what do I do? Or is that the best thing I've ever written? Which I think to myself all the time. And I like cannot seem to stop thinking that. Like, I know it's not going to be the case. I know there will be other projects. Like, this isn't it for me, but I always like, as soon as it's over, a week or two after it's over, I think, is that the best thing I'm ever going to have done? So.
Yeah. And there's a great, you've probably seen it, and billions of people have, I feel like, Elizabeth Gilbert's TED Talk about essentially, like, quote unquote, like going home. Like, she had to wrestle with Eat, Pray, Love being probably her greatest success. And so how do you go back to work when your best work might be behind you? And so she identified that, just the mere fact of sitting down and generating fiction or whatever, or nonfiction, was like her going home. And if she can get to that place of generation and have that be the victory, then she can proceed with her art. So is that something you kind of, do you sort of relate to that?
So mine is a little bit different. So the way I have found that I am able to get kind of through it is to think of my work as benefiting others. Like, that's what I really want out of my work. And so, like, even though, like, obviously, as any other writer, I have an ego that I like needs constant love and feeding. But I think, like, what I tend to do to help myself through that, like, is that like the biggest, best piece I'm ever going to write? Or are those the most beautiful prose I'm ever going to craft? Like, is to think like, no, there's so many other people out there who need their stories told. And maybe I won't end up telling them in the New York Times. Like, maybe it will be for a small local paper, but there are still people who need help. I can continue to do that work, and it may not be glamorous. It may not get a lot of attention, but that work still matters. And so one of the things I did when I was kind of at the depths of this arrival fallacy and feeling really like, just, wow, I'm never going to do anything that I like really care about again, was that I started a writing program in our local federal prison, because I was feeling like, my work didn't matter, or I wasn't doing work that mattered. But that was one way I could make my work matter, right? So instead of trying to, I wasn't having a lot of luck pitching criminal justice stuff. And so instead I just took my work to the prison, and helped other folks tell their stories. So I think that, like, that is what I use to get through the idea of, like, it's possible I'll never do anything quite as cool as a Netflix documentary. But that's fine. I think as long as I keep pushing forward to try and use, journalism to help other people.
You alluded to it earlier that you love you love the work, and I wonder where you feel most engaged in the process.
Well, that's a great question. I love interviewing people. I love listening to people's stories. I will sit and listen to people all day long. So that is a really, like, my favorite part of the process, almost to a point where it's a problem, where I will over-report stories, but I just, that part of the process is probably my favorite. And yeah, I like going through documents. I love having my receipts in order, right? So, like, fact checking, I think, is very validating to me, and be like, yes, I have all of these things. And I'm ready, I don't mind the process of, this is taking some getting used to, but I don't mind the process of calling the person who the unflattering story is about, and saying, these are the allegations that I have, and this is the backup that I have to prove it. What do you want to say? I don't love that part of it, but it also kind of feels like I like doing it because I like making sure that, everything is above board. So I'm learning to love that process a little bit more. The actual writing part is hard. That's probably my least favorite part of the process. If I could just interview people all day long, that would be my dream job.
With respect to how you kind of draw inspiration and kind of fill the well in terms of, just reading other people's work, and that could be books or magazine pieces, that what are some of those that you've drawn inspiration from? Maybe books or magazine articles that you return to remind yourself how it's done, and be like, all right, they did it, so if I just dig in, I can do it too.
Good question. Yeah. I mean, I'm a pretty religious New Yorker reader, but not saying that that is always like the best of all, arbiters of journalism or anything like that. But I do try to read it and think critically about how are these stories constructed, so to some degree, like I feel like journalism has ruined my ability to sit and just read a story, because I always am thinking about how did this get constructed, or like what was the like reverse engineering of this like reporting, how to get that detail. So I do try to sit down with the New Yorker every week, although they, like everybody else, they stack up, and, think about at least how those pieces came into being. I have subscriptions, of course, the New York Times and the Washington Post, and read those, although I don't do that much newspaper journalism at this moment. But, I think that always has, relevance in terms of figuring out how people are doing fact finding. This is going to sound terrible, but I tend not to read nonfiction books twice. There's just so much out there. There's so many. I love to read nonfiction books, and I read lots of them. But I find it hard to return to them. And there are only a few that I return to, but they're mostly books on writing that I return to, versus like the actual nonfiction books themselves.
What are the books you return to on writing?
So, my very, very favorite, is actually, Ann Patchett has a book called This is the Story of a Happy Marriage. And it's, short stories, but it's kind of about her life as a writer. And, she's a fiction writer, so it's a little bit different. But, I just find her words and her advice to be very, clear and frank. I think sometimes books on writing can like oversell the writing life. I don't think she does that, which is nice, to like understand that like even people at the very top are struggling a little bit is nice. And then, the fun thing about having this, prison writing workshop is that, I've gone back to some of the, original books on writing that I read years and years ago, like Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, right? Which is so great. And it's been fun to go through that with, a bunch of guys who have never thought about writing in any other way than like the 5-paragraph essay that was taught, in their high school. And so I've been enjoying going through that again. So those are the two books that I think, every writer should have on their shelf, able to, reference when they need it.
And also, like when you're kind of deconstructing a New Yorker piece, and of course you're at a level of proficiency and competency and visibility where maybe this doesn't strike you as it does for other people, but sometimes I wonder how writers and journalists and freelancers process feelings of competition and jealousy among peers. Is this something that you wrestle with?
Oh God, it's so bad.
Yeah.
It's so awful. Yes, this is like one part of my personality that like I really, really wish that I could change. I'm horribly competitive. I've always been that way. Even as a kid, like losing like a board game was like a full-on meltdown for me. And so yes, in fact, it's so much so that like, right, sometimes I like find it hard to read my peers, right? Because like I just think about like how much better they are at this than I am. And so I think that's very normal, but I try not to let it be crippling, right? Like I should want to read great journalism, even though like deep down I'm like, why did I not write this? Or why are they so much better than me, right? So yeah, I think a part of it is just recognizing that you have this ugly trait inside of you and that it is this ugly trait, and that like somebody else's success does not really take away from your own. Yes, there are to some degree limited bylines, but I should be using their success to push myself to be better, right? So that doesn't mean that I haven't silenced the occasional person on Twitter who is just winning at all things all the time, and I just need a break. That is very real and very normal. And I think if you're a writer and you're feeling that way, it's so normal. Just do it. Do what you have to do to get through. But, if there is truly an exemplary piece of writing that everybody on the internet is talking about and you're avoiding it because you just like can't stomach it, read it. Just read it. It's probably useful. And hopefully, you can grab a little something from what they've done, and someday they'll be envying you. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Nice. And as we kind of wind down here, AC, of course, coming down to the end, and I like asking people for a recommendation to unplug from whatever it is they do, and that can be anything. So what is your recommendation for the listeners out there who might need a little distraction from their everyday?
Can I give you two?
Please, more the merrier.
Okay. Well, the first one, I mean, you're not going to be surprised by, but if you possibly can, get a couple of chickens. They're so enjoyable. They're so fun. I kind of cannot believe how much joy these like little baby T-Rexes have brought me. So that's like the first one. I honestly, every day at about 7:15, I go out and I sit in my chicken yard and like a couple of them hop on my lap, and it's just like a good way to like end the day and be like, okay, you know what? Like these chickens do not care about my byline. These chickens do not care whether I sold something or not. You know, like that. It's just, anyways. I mean, any pet would do it, but chickens are supremely fun. And they also provide breakfast. It's pretty great. And then the second one, which is like a little bit more serious, but it's something that I've been trying to do, and I found it quite effective. And this is, comes from a positive psychologist, Martin Seligman. He's kind of the father of positive psychology. But he has this exercise where, he asks people at the end of the day to journal about the 3 things that happened to them that day that were positive. And I have found this exercise to be hugely, hugely effective in terms of like making you reflect on your day in a positive light. And so like so much of my work is like moves at a glacial pace, right? Like I'll file a FOIA and not hear anything. Yesterday I think I sent out 10 interview requests and nobody got back to me, and so a lot of my work moves really, really slow. And it's really easy for me to fixate on all the things that I didn't do or all the things that like, didn't go well during the day. But like taking a few minutes at the end of the day to just, and like it's often really like simple things like I got to ride my mountain bike, or, I had time to sit with my chickens, or, my husband and I connected really well, and had a great conversation, which sometimes when you've been married a long time, you kind of forget to do, so it can be simple stuff like that. And it's a really, really nice way to end your day and remember that like even the shittiest days have some positive moments in them. And I highly recommend that.
Oh, that's amazing. All right. So where can people find you online, AC, and get more familiar with your work?
Sure. So I'm most active on Twitter, where I am at AC Shilton. I have an Instagram that's the same, and then on Facebook as well as AC Shilton. And again, my website is www.acshilton.com. So, it's not super creative, but easy to find.
Fantastic. Well, awesome. Well, this was great. Thank you so much for carving the time and talking shop and everything in between. So this was a lot of fun, and thank you so much for doing this. This was great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
Tasteful. That was a tasteful CNF episode, wasn't it? Thanks to Baypath and River Teeth for the support. And of course, AC Shilton. ACShilton.com. Go check out her work. It's good stuff. Be sure to subscribe to the show. Consider leaving a nice review on Apple Podcasts. I hope I've made something worth sharing, so if it means anything to you, pass it along to a friend. That's how this is going to grow, by finding our people, the people who are into this genre, the creative nonfiction genre, who can benefit from it. If you dig in telling true stories, you know someone else who does. Pass it along. Hand off the baton. Keep the conversation going, of course, on Twitter at CNFPod and Instagram at CNFPod, Facebook at CNF Podcast, or just searching Creative Nonfiction Podcast. It will pop up. I think that's a wrap, friend. I don't have much to say, except remember, if you can do, interview. See ya!